It was always a myth that it's a 0% tax rate. It is because of the 100% relief. That's what made it 0%. Whereas now they've reduced it to 50% of capital gains tax. So the effective rate is 12% currently.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching another one of our videos. Today it's probably not going to be quite as long, but we're talking about employee ownership trusts, or EOTs, and more specifically answering the question, is an EOT still a good idea in 2026? And throughout the video we'll explain why this question might arise. I'm once again joined by Corporate Finance Director Martin.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, and Martin's done quite a few EOTs in your time, haven't you?
Too many, yeah. No, I've done quite a lot, yeah. So yeah, I've got a pretty good understanding. We've got a few clients that are actively going through it at the minute as well, so quite topical. So yeah.
Brilliant. And if we look quite sweaty in this video, that's because we are. This office
8 million degrees outside.
Roasting, but we're going to get through this. So yeah, just to start with then, for just as a light of reintroduction, what actually is an EOT? Just nice and quick.
Yeah. So EOT, so it stands for Employee Ownership Trust, which you mentioned. Essentially, it's an exit strategy for business owners. So there's various ways that they can exit. EOT, it's fairly recent, but it's definitely more common these days. But it's a form of exit strategy for businesses where they essentially sell their shares to a trust which buys their company. So that's in essence what it is, and it allows the employees to become indirect owners of the company. So they don't own the shares, the employees don't own the shares. So it's slightly misleading when it says employee ownership, but they are the main beneficiaries. So everything has to act in accordance and for the benefit of the employees.
Okay. So, and speaking of benefits generally, then what are the main benefits for an EOT if you're looking at it as a seller who wants to sell their business?
Yeah. So I think the first one, and I've put it as the first one because I think it's undervalued. It's control of a process and certainty. If a business owner wants to sell their business to an employee ownership trust, yes, you've got to do the correct things to make sure it's set up correctly and you're eligible to do it. But ultimately it will happen. You compare that to a trade sale where things might fall through, might not happen. So I put certainty there because I think that's what a lot of people want these days, is certainty of something happening. And it sometimes can be an under sort of valued aspect of EOTs, but I think it is quite a key one. So I'll put that as number one. I think number two, you get full market value for the shares. So again, slightly different process if you're selling to a trade buyer, MBO team, or private equity. You've got to do a formal valuation. You've got to assess what the value is. But we run a process here where we get an independent valuation as well. So there's a robust process there, but you do gain full market value for those shares. So again,
that means you don't have to haggle with anyone or negotiate pricing.
You don't, yeah. But I think it's really important that there is a robust valuation there, because the danger of EOTs, and maybe that's why we're seeing some of the changes that have come into force, is that you end up getting quite toppy valuation multiples, and that's not what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to get a sensible valuation as part of the process.
Is that people trying to artificially raise their valuation beyond what it
Look, I think that you could argue there's certain examples where that might have happened, and look, for me, fundamentally, you've got to look at an EOT as a solution for sellers, but it's got to be sustainable and longer term, because otherwise, whatever valuation you create, you're not going to get the full value if you don't embrace what it means to be an EOT. You're just going to end up with less cash in your hands over the period of time that's repaid anyway. So yeah, I would say that is a good sort of selling point, if you like, and may benefit. I think protecting legacy, again, really important. So if you're a business owner that wants to protect legacy, you don't want somebody coming in, you don't want it to be absorbed as part of a big group and just become a small cog in a massive wheel, then EOT fits. It's about prolonging that legacy. Your name's always going to be on that door potentially, and it's just a good way to do that. And I think a couple other points. So if you're wanting to sell and have a slower transition away, I think it's quite beneficial. So if you're not quite ready, if you're sort of 5-6 years away from retirement, it's a good option to have now, because one, you're still needed in the business and you can slowly transition away from the business rather than leaving on day one. I mean, with any exit option these days, if you hold the goodwill in the business, you're going to have to stay in it. Doesn't matter if it's a trade sale or whatever. But I think with an EOT, it just allows you to step away over a slower period. So I think that's it. I think they're the main sort of benefits I would throw out there. Obviously, the low rate of tax is one, and that drives a lot of conversations around EOT. I've put it as a last benefit because I think you've got to go into an EOT with the right mindset for it to be more beneficial. So yes, great way, really tax efficient, but can't be the main driver.
So what happened was last year the government announced that the previous 100% relief from capital gains tax had been reduced to 50%.
Yeah.
So, but that still makes it one of the most tax efficient ways to sell your business, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the effective rate now, you're right there, it was always a myth that it's a 0% tax rate. It is because of the 100% relief. That's what made it 0%. Whereas now they've reduced it to 50% of capital gains tax. So the effective rate is 12% currently. So that might go up if they change capital gains tax rates. It might go up. But at the minute it's 12%. But compared to the other exit options and other solutions out there, it's still a really low tax rate for selling shares within your business. So still, yeah, I think it was needed, something in there.
Yeah, why did the government decide to reduce the capital gains tax relief?
I think it was, well, this is just my opinion. I think that, look, the government fundamentally wanted to encourage employee ownership. You know, that's why, and sometimes to encourage people to do stuff, you have to give generous reliefs out there. Take, electric cars, for example, no difference there. It was loads of reliefs and then they've slowly sort of reined it in. So it's a similar thing for businesses. They're wanting to encourage more employee-owned businesses. So when they set them up, the reliefs were really generous. I think naturally over time, they've got to rein that in. And I imagine they're tracking all sorts of data and seeing the numbers of EOT transactions and monitoring that. And they felt like now was the right time to tax it accordingly. I think the rate's okay. I think it sits in a good spot in terms of the overall effective rate of 12%. I still think it's low enough to encourage EOTs, but I do think you've got to keep it sort of around that level to continue the sort of influx of EOT businesses over the years.
So it sounds like what you're saying is a bit from before as well, is that as much as the capital gains tax relief was a big benefit and a good conversation starter, it was never supposed to be the reason you chose EOT.
No, and I think that's the right mindset to have. I think ultimately, sellers are going to argue that they've worked very long in a business, they've taken risks, worked long hours, they've grown a business to a certain point, and therefore they're not cashing in on that time and effort and risk that they've taken over time. But you've got to think longer term about this. It's got, with any transaction like this, whenever you're talking about exit solutions, even if tax starts the conversation, the lower rate of tax, what I've found in numerous situations is when you actually start to talk to clients and understand what their longer term objectives are, EOTs aren't the solution. An MBO might be a better solution, or a trade sale might be a better option. So I think I quite like it because it encourages the conversation with sellers.
So you mentioned MBO there. So that would be one of the main kind of alternative exit routes versus an EOT. How would you help someone decide between whether an EOT or an MBO is the way to go?
It's a good question. So, it's probably the first, generally speaking, I'll sit down with the clients and again, try and understand what their objectives are. But I think one of my first questions always is understanding what the current business owner does. Are they involved in the day-to-day business? Because that's quite key. And what are their senior management team? Who are the rising stars? Who are the second in command? Who are the people that are underneath? And have they shown appetite to one day own the business? If they have, then you've got to consider EOT very carefully, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to drive the business forward. But they're not going to have the same sort of benefits and reliefs going forward as being a shareholder, especially if you sell 100% of your business to a trust. So these are the sorts of conversations you need to have at the very beginning to understand what the right solution is. So, yeah.
And it's all going to well getting the tax relief, but if you end up breaking the rules or not qualifying or something goes wrong later, the government can actually claw that back.
Claw it back, yeah. And that's part of any process. it's really important you do this one when you're considering employee ownership. Make sure you've got a good advisor team there, looking at the sort of tax, the finance, the commercial, but also legal as well, getting a good legal advisor that's used to EOT transactions, because the last thing that we want is HMRC coming back, picking holes in it, and ultimately you end up having to pay tax that you never thought you would have to. So there is a process there. It's there for a reason, to sort of make sure these things are ticked off as we go along, and also post-transaction make sure that we reduce the risk of that happening.
So all in all, an EOT is still a good idea in 2026?
Yeah, absolutely.
For the right business?
Yeah, I think that's the key. For the right business, like I said at the beginning, we're speaking to a few clients at the minute who are looking at it, they're doing it for the right reasons, and they're the ones that are going to make it work longer term. I think the only thing to consider since the changes is funding. So obviously with an effective tax rate of 12%, for businesses where you're considering EOT but you're not particularly cash rich, there's going to be a funding gap. You're going to have to raise the cash to pay that tax. So you can time it so that you have a longer period than or the maximum period to repay that tax, but you're going to have to pay it at some point. So you've got to consider maybe funding starts to play into it, where you're going to go out to the market. So I think that's the only difference really in terms of the structuring. But again, go back to the beginning. They work really well for as long as you're doing it for the right reasons.
Perfect. That sounds like a very nice way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Martin. So if you're interested in more stuff about information about EOTs, we've got loads of it on our website. You can have a look on our blog, which is on Gravitate.digital. There's also a free in-depth EOT guide on our website, which is updated to include all the latest changes. You can download that completely free. And also we have a couple more videos on our YouTube channel about EOT and other exit strategies, a lot of them featuring Martin. But besides that, I hope you've enjoyed this one. Please give it a like and subscribe. And if you have any questions at all, email us at hello@gravitate.digital. But other than that, we're going to go and go outside because it's really warm.
Might have an ice cream.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys.